Hey, welcome to the Craft and Business of Books. I'm Tetyana.
And I'm Marissa.
And this is the show that gives you the tools, the tricks to the writing process, also the stumbling blocks and everything in between. But it also gives you the industry perspective, which is sometimes really hard to find. And what we're going to do is go live every Friday at 2 p.m. and give you guys the information to help you along the way to make it a little bit of a less scary process. Mm-hmm. So please remember to click to subscribe to be reminded before every episode. And also during the show, feel free to leave questions and comments so that we can address it, or we can do it in a different broadcast. So what are we talking about today?
Today, we are going to talk about the process of editing. Editing has to happen to every book, but how is it different if you're going it alone via or being ushered through the process via a publisher? How many times does a book get changed? Does every book change a lot? What kinds of changes happen? And after the book leaves your hands, how do you handle that process? So let's start with you by talking about editing Motherland after, what felt like your 100th draft.
Yes, that's it. I was going to say that's exactly what it felt like. I think for my process, I went through a lot of edits, but also the main bits were me editing for submission and then me editing for self-publishing. So I will discuss that in a minute. But in the beginning, people kept asking me, and then I would ask people, how many edits does it take to get a book on a shelf? Like, when do you know it's done? And that's like asking somebody, what length is a piece of string? I mean, everybody's different because every book is different. The content is different. The subject matter is different, depending on the length of the novel. I mean, for me, writing historical fiction was really difficult because I'd never done that genre before, and even though I had the bones of the story, I needed to tie it all together. So the first two drafts, I'd say, were absolutely hideous. So editing that is a very hard process anyway, because it's a personal thing, right? So you've poured so much of yourself onto the page, and then you look at it and you think, this is terrible. Mm-hmm. You have to make it really impersonal, I think, when you edit. And I tend to, and I know this is probably not recommended, but I tend to self-edit when I write, which slows the process down. So, my first two edits took 3 years. And there's a lot of research that went into it as well. But I'd say the third edit was when it started I started kind of seeing a shape for the novel. And then at the third edit is when I started asking beta readers to have a look at it. Mm-hmm. And I had very objective friends who I trusted to read it. And then I would go back, and I think I would take a step back probably before I started the next edit. So I take probably a month or two break, fresh eyes. And then I found mistakes that I hadn't seen before.
Yeah.
The fourth edit was when I was confident enough to think, okay, I think I've done everything I can with it. And I started sending it out on submissions. Now, that was when the story really started changing, because agents were very complimentary of it, but they were then coming back to me saying, there's no tension, really. The plot could be a little bit quicker. There were jumps in the storyline that didn't make sense to them. They wanted me to introduce a secondary character to add tension. Mm-hmm. So they're approaching it from the industry side, which is, here's what might sell. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that was when my editing took a very different turn. Mm-hmm. Because I'm sure you've seen kind of the iterations of how that happens, because there's a different level then.
Absolutely. With a publisher, you're going to have a few different kinds of editors have their hands in your book, and they're going to do different kinds of edits, so you have, first you'll have commissioning editors who go out and actually, acquire books, right? So while, I mean, they will do edits as well, but I think we think of editors as, someone, late night up in an office at a mahogany desk with a Tiffany lamp over them, marking up.
It's so romantic.
I know. It happens. It happens. It, is actually, much more boring than that, really. You have your commissioning editor again, who will sort of start the process, right? And they're going to work with an agent, and they're going to go out and acquire books that maybe the publisher is looking for specifically, or obviously they have their many reasons for going after certain kinds of books. And a commissioning editor then will funnel down, if a book is acquired, to a desk editor, which is different in book publishing than it is from, say, television journalism or something like that.
Yeah,
terms get used in every media industry, but they all mean something slightly different. A desk editor is going to actually then look at everything very specifically. Then you've got copy editors, right, who are going to fact check. They'll make sure if you reference that that something was created, a building was built in a certain year, they're going to go and check and make sure that you haven't made a mistake, and then it's going to go to a proofreader who's going to actually read for typos, right? Grammatical errors, spelling, things like that really, really, really nitty gritty, fine tooth comb work. Yeah. So, you have your structural edits and your developmental edits, which are going to be the big things, like you've mentioned, you got back from a lot of agents, where they're going to tell you how you can really make this story better. Then you're going to go to line edits. That's literally what it is. It's an editor looking at the book line by line for changes to sentences, how you can specifically change, how two sentences or two paragraphs work together to make it the most successful it can be.
Yeah.
And then you get down to the nitty gritty stuff. And then of course, even after that, you're going to have a managing editor, right? Or production editor or something like that, who's actually, taking the files and getting them to a printer, who's also going to put their eyes on it. And, if things get broken when they get transferred to the printer, if lines break up on different, a sentence breaks up on different lines or something like that, they're gonna pull that out again. So, even when you get to the proof stage, when you have people, actually reading the book, you have journalists receiving copies of the proofs and everything, those are not always proofread at that point. There are typically lots of errors in there.
And that's the misconception that a lot of people in my position have, which is, oh my goodness, you get all these, proofs, and everybody's talking about them on social media, or they're sharing, like, look, I got an advanced copy.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that actually those proofs, you're still kind of looking, and who's looking for those errors? Is it the author, or is it the author and editor and everybody else?
Well, I mean, typically the proofs are not for people in-house. So the proofs are printed for journalists, for bloggers, for, early readers, right? So it's really not, they may be, a proofreader may be using the same version, but digitally, somewhere else. So no one's going to actually mark up that proof. That's, it's considered good enough to get out to people early enough who need it. Magazine journalists, for example, they still have such a long lead time that you reach a point where you have to get something to them. Yeah. And it's just depending on the schedule and depending on, whether things have run late, it doesn't always get to that perfect state before it's printed in that, in that sense, or in that format. So it's typically still, rolling in the background while things are already beginning to, to the public. So.
And I think, but from, I find all of this information is really interesting, because it's not even I was going to use the word facade. It's not even a facade. It's just presented in a certain way where, when I kind of decided eventually to self-publish, I had to do all those line edits myself. I had to, so I kind of understand where you're coming from, but then still you see something like this that is being passed around. And even that, the hardcover for me, it still had mistakes in it.
Sure.
And I kind of said to people, treat that as an uncorrected proof, because once I kind of got to that point, even before that, after, I decided to self-publish, and a lot of agents, I took those suggestions on, and it took me another 4 edits to get my manuscript to the point where I was ready to self-publish it and then fund it through Kickstarter and do hardcover copies. But I mean, this book is very different to what I started out with. And I think that people don't understand that it doesn't take just 3 months to write a manuscript and then send it to an agent. And they're like, oh, we'll just take it from here. Yeah. I think you still have to edit as much as possible,
Absolutely.
Before even submitting. Sure. And then even after submission, the agent's like, it's out of your hands, right? I mean, as the author, do you think, this is something we can cover with an actual editor when we have a guest next week. So I find it really fascinating that the editor is then taking it off your hands, but the author is still kind of involved because they have to produce the work, but then the editor is saying, yeah, don't like this, cut 10 pages.
Of course, there's a lot of back and forth at that point, with someone who's going to do the line edits. You're going to have, because, they may suggest something, you may really disagree.
Yeah.
You have a lot of conversation about that. There's a lot of back and forth, and typically you have people, who your editor proper, so to speak, is the person who's kind of collating all of those changes coming in at once, because, it's easy to describe it in the linear fashion that I just did, but it doesn't always happen that way. And, you're on a schedule. You've already told booksellers a book's going to be out at a certain time. Things have to happen in tandem. And, it's the editor's responsibility to take in your author, first of all, their comments to you, your responses, the copy editor's remarks, put all of those things in together. And then again, with the proofreader and the production editors and everything, it's a big job.
Yeah, it's what have you ever seen any books from your side, the industry side, that are wildly different than what you saw kind of in the beginning of the stage?
Sure. Everything changes. I don't think I've ever read a book that was, once it was finished, that is exactly the same as it was, in the manuscript form. I saw The Miniaturist by Jessie Burton, on when it was on submission, and we were bidding for it, and I of course was I loved it, and I was like, we didn't get the book, and then I got to read it again, of course, once it finally came out from a different publisher, and I think those are fun instances too, where you don't see the middle bit, because a lot of times you'll see iterations as it goes through the process, but it's actually kind of fun when it goes to someone else and you get to see how much it's changed, but you don't know what happened.
I think it was on Instagram, because I've been kind of following Jessie for years now, and it was on Instagram, I think, that she put up a post where it was like a picture of her floor, and it was, I think, all 12 drafts of The Miniaturist, which is wild. And that was kind of in the beginning of my writing journey. I remember looking at that going, I'm astounded. And obviously she had some coaching from her editor and everybody else that was kind of working on this, but it was still a very involved and long and drawn out process. And I don't know how many drafts it took for her to be comfortable with submission, but it's still, from beginning to end, was 12 drafts. And I'd be really curious if we ever manage to have Jessie on here. I'd be really curious to know who she deleted, who she added, how the story changed.
Yeah, that stuff can be as interesting as you know, itself, what changed.
But I think, you know, from the self-publishing perspective, I think if I do recommend, if somebody can afford to hire a professional editor, it probably would save you a lot of headaches, because I remember getting to a point where I was so tired. I was so done with reading my story, and my eyes were falling out of my head. And yet still I couldn't catch a few typos. And that changed because on KDP, luckily, you know, you can actually update your book before people, you know, keep buying it. So there's a little window there, which is really helpful, because then it kind of helped me save face a little bit. But in the process of submission, actually, one of the agents that was really helpful and really encouraging in my journey was like, maybe look into hiring a professional editor. And they are expensive, but then you get what you pay for, because to have somebody do line edits of a 400-page book, it's a mountain of a job, you know? And I remember I was looking just for kind of editing services, and one of the books that was an inspiration for me, one of kind of a handful, because it's historical fiction and is beautifully written and was very evocative, was The Fever Tree by Jennifer McVeigh. And when I looked her up and I read more about her story, because this was her debut novel, I remember reading that she used an editor by the name of Brett Hardman. And she's been successful with a lot of kind of helping a lot of people edit books. And Jennifer did not self-publish. She had an agent. But before she submitted to an agent, she wanted to get the absolute best polished version possible. You don't have to go that route, but if you can, it's very helpful. So I mean, if I could have done it, it would have been interesting to see what would have happened to the story. But even so, having self-published, I changed the story wildly. I added characters. I added kind of more tension. I added a prologue that never existed before. You know, so I think just having somebody, I was lucky enough to have agents that kind of pushed me to ask myself really questions about the story. Had they not done that, I don't know where the book would be right now. You know?
It's an interesting, such a silly way to say it's a problem, really, because it's so expensive, right? And it is cost prohibitive, I think, for a lot of debut authors to actually think about hiring and, you know, a freelance editor to help them before they submit to agents. But yes, absolutely, you are going to get value for money if you find the right person. It's, you know, especially as someone who's worked for a large commercial publisher before, you know, that could be hugely beneficial. Hugely. I mean, you know, you may see your entire return on that investment because you know, you work with an agent and you end up with a good publisher. Yeah.
And my question is, how do agents, when they see a manuscript and they know it has to be heavily edited and they know it has to be changed to us, how do they see that? How do they pick it out of the slush pile and go, I can work with this, even though I have to change half of the book, I can work with this? Isn't that wild? They must have some editing prowess, right?
Sure. I mean, a lot of them have been editors, and you know, and make the jump to the dark side. And it's, you know, a lot of them I know, you know, they were editors in previous lives, and absolutely, that's something valuable. And even the agents who, you know, haven't had that title in the past, absolutely have that sense, that same sense of what will work, because they've been doing it for so long, and they can, you know, they can hear an author's voice come off the page, and they know, even if it needs help, even if there are, you know, characters that need to be worked on, they still can see all of the boxes being ticked, you know, after a few pages.
That's amazing. I mean, I think my takeaway from this, and I think this should definitely be something that we revisit with a book editor, because I would like to hear from the horse's mouth, as it were, in, you know, in the sense of like, what is their process? How do they approach it? Because I can say what I like, but then I've self-published. You've seen it from a very kind of different perspective, but still in the industry. Yep. It'd be really interesting to ask kind of point blank, what is this process? I mean, we can come out with our own takeaways from this. I mean, mine would be prepared for months of like reading your words until you are absolutely sick of them. You know, whatever editing process you have, I think it has to be, in the beginning, it has to be the bones. And then you get kind of closer and closer until it becomes so intimate. You are literally, like you said, line by line.
Yeah. As far as you can mimic that process, if you're doing it on your own, you should.
Yeah. And I think like there has to be a level of patience in that process. I think the more you edit, but not like there is actually a point where I felt that you can very easily go into the wrong direction. So you over edit and then you destroy the story in the process. I think there's a bit of a sweet spot where you kind of, I think you feel it. I remember kind of knowing when it was ready to self-publish. I knew that I had a story that I was proud of. And I think you do feel that, but it takes a long time to get there, you know? Yeah. So that's my takeaway from it. I don't know. What do you think?
I think it's, you know, it has to happen. I think the only thing that you really need to keep in mind if you're going to do it on your own is that you need to take that time away. You need to take the breaks. You need to be able to come at it with fresh eyes because, you know, you're not going to spot that double the. But if you leave for a week and you come back, it's going to be the first thing you see. Yeah. And that's, I think, a really, you know, sort of granular example of the whole mindset of coming back and doing it in stages. So.
Yeah, that's a good point because an editor is your eyes away from it.
Absolutely.
You know, and that's a good point.
And all of those different people touch it.
Yeah, I like that. Those are kind of different points where you can step away and somebody else.
Yeah.
That's really good. I like that.
Have as many people read your book as you can.
Yeah, and that's scary in itself, but you have to let go and be prepared that it's a hard thing to hear when somebody goes, this beginning absolutely makes no sense. You're like, okay, that is, it's not even criticism. It's just helpful suggestions that you can write down and say, okay, well, you know, they are reading it as a consumer. When you're in it, it's really difficult, you know, to see that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's go on to our next segment. I'm very excited about this because it's a really nice, chunky book, I think, to sink our teeth into, especially when it comes to editing, I think. So let's see what makes this book great.
This is a dramatic reading. To start with, there were confident faces on the TV. Spokespeople from the CDC saying it was a virus, not very severe. Most of people recovered fine. Sound familiar? Well, we are not talking about the coronavirus today. This is actually a passage from the book that we're discussing, which is Naomi Alderman's The Power. The Power is a science fiction novel within a novel set 5,000 years in the future when women are the dominant gender in society because they have developed an organ that gives them the power to deliver electricity out of their hands. It was published in 2016, was awarded the Women's Prize for Fiction in 2017. So, Tetyana, as a writer, tell us what makes this book great.
Full disclosure.
I like how we always start with that.
Of course, I know. Like, let's be honest. We have to be honest with people. Yeah. I didn't like the book. I didn't like it. It just didn't speak to me like it did to other people. But what I found astounding was that it read like a Bible. There were so many characters and voices and stories and scripture, unique, completely original scripture and voice that I don't think anybody can recreate. Yeah. Genuinely, I think Naomi did an extraordinary job. Yeah. Now, why I wanted to talk about this book in particular for this episode about editing, because I would love to have been a fly on the wall when somebody picked up that manuscript and said, yes, I want to work on this. I cannot imagine how long that took. I can't imagine how many times Naomi had to edit
Mm-hmm.
her manuscript before she submitted, because it should be a movie, genuinely.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if they're making it into one, because like from an editing perspective, from a content perspective, and it's not even a huge book. That's the thing. I mean, it's not like a giant science fiction 1,000-page, trilogy kind of story.
Yep.
It's so packed, and some even, like, some of it is even italicized. Some has different. Some sections have different fonts in it. Anyway, I thought it was extraordinary from that perspective, from the content perspective.
Yep.
What about you?
Well, I think it's kind of funny, because I think I don't know if I just noticed this when I moved to England in 2012 more than I had noticed it working in America the previous, however many years. But man, English people love multiple timelines and love multiple names. So, I mean, I think there's certainly something to that. It is something that I think people are more open to, and excited by. And of course, Naomi is, is a Londoner. I think the thing that stands out, here is that we've come to the best possible advice, I could possibly give an aspiring writer, which is, okay, listen carefully. If you know Barack Obama and you can ask him to tell people that your book is really great,
I know.
Then you will have a successful book on your hands. So I know I am a wealth of knowledge. You are so happy you are here.
Oh, that's great. But it's true. Can you imagine, like, how do you digest something like that?
Well, it's funny. I mean, when moments like that happen, I mean, certainly as an author, I mean, I can't even fathom. But for the support staff around a book, when something like that happens, you just bask in it. I mean, it means sales, of course, and everyone knows that immediately, which is exciting. But when your book is celebrated by smart people, you can pat yourself on the back and call it a job well done. That's that's huge. So, I mean, of course, the book received other accolades as well.
Yeah.
Pushed it forward, like winning the Baileys, and Foyle's named it their best fiction book of the year. It was included on the Washington Post and the New York Times, top 10 books of 2017 list.
It's nuts.
It really is. And, people like Joss Whedon and, Barack Obama, gave it their thumbs up. I mean, you have all of those things together, and, you're in people's faces enough, and not via advertising or, any marketing messages, really genuine responses, that's huge. I think, another thing to note, of course, is that Alderman and Margaret Atwood have a special relationship, where, Margaret Atwood with her. So, and she was top of mind again at the same time, because The Handmaid's Tale, was just being released as in the television adaptation, and the themes, were brought up over and over again, because they offer obvious parallels, and they both put women in positions of power, but they go about it in very different ways. Yeah. One giveth, one taketh away. The power holds a mirror to our current status quo of women living in fear of physical violence, by physical dominance, I should say, by men, and, and asks what would be different if it were flipped. And ultimately it appears to conclude that nothing would be different, which really, really resonated with people, for better or worse. And, folks had plenty to say about it. So for as many people as loved it, people hated it, and really were really, really vocal about that online, which is interesting. So again, class, we are at word of mouth, people feeling compelled to talk about your book being a major driver of success, making a book great.
I think, I wonder if the content alongside the way it was presented made a perfect storm to make it such a phenomenon. Because I think whilst the subject matter is important and really impressive for somebody to take on as an author, doing it in such a wildly imaginative, I don't want to use the word aggressive, but it was so in your face, and it was so imaginative. It was like something witchy, you know. It was presented in such a unique way, and I think for somebody to work with that, to see that kind of content and say, this is wild, I want this, and I want other people to read this, is amazing.
Yeah, I think something like this, the concept on its own, right, is selling. I think I'm going to try. I will actually try not to use any examples in this, because I think it's not the nicest thing to say. But there are lots of books, lots of shows, right? I mean, I think we can all think of examples where the concept is so compelling.
Yeah.
That it gets published, it gets written, it gets put on television, even though the execution may not be what what it could have been, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, because the voice is there. The voice is there, and I think that's really important. And I think going back to editing, and when agents see something, or when even an author self-publishes and they hear that voice, they know it's right.
Absolutely.
And that's the great bit.
Mm-hmm.
And on that note, we're going to say that's it from us for today. Tune in always Friday, 2 p.m. Eastern. It's live. Make sure to subscribe below. Mm-hmm. And we will try. We got a comment today from somebody in Scotland that was watching, so that was nice. So please do send us comments or questions, and we will try to address them. But yeah, it's been really great having you all here.
I didn't see that. I was on the wrong tab. Hello, Jill.
Oh, but it's lovely. Yeah, hello, Jill. So yes, please do remember to subscribe. Please leave comments below, and we will try and say hello. But that's it from us, and it was really great having you guys here.
We'll see you next week.